Okay, we'll give the guys, I can see people dropping in, Phil, but we'll give them a few more minutes, given it's the hottest day this year in the UK. I bet it's hotter than it is with you in Australia.
Well, yes, yeah. We're in the middle of winter, John. So
yeah, that's no excuse.
Although, actually, the last few days have been very nice here in Melbourne. It's been sunny and still, it's been absolute perfect winter days.
Nice.
Yeah, today was a high of 15, so a good 20 degrees lower than you.
Well, I'd take that for a winter temperature any day. And what time is it with you now? You're 9 hours ahead?
Yeah, so we're at 9 p.m.
9 p.m. Well, good on you for staying up till 9 p.m. drinking water to join the webinar.
Water. Yes. Or is it? Is it?
It could be gin. I know you brew your own. Good man. Okay, right. So I think we'll get going. We've got a good number of attendees considering the glorious weather in the UK at the moment. So today, thanks for joining us in the Working From Home webinar, and we're going to be looking at understanding post-pandemic consumer trends and the new landscape. Now, to do this, we're going to be looking at the performance of a number of categories in 2 different countries that couldn't be further apart, the UK and Australia. So we're going to look at the changes to the SERP landscape. We're also going to take a look and see who the winners are. And we're going to see, importantly, if and how the SERP landscape has been changing before, during, and after the pandemic. And finally, we got some recommendations for you all off the back of this data. And talking of data, this is all available in our Australian report, which is coming out next week. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Okay, so before we go any further, I just want to introduce my guest today. That's Phil Zohrab, who's the MD of Ground Control Data, our partners in Australia. Phil, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself or what you guys do?
Cool. Well, dialing back 20 years, I was actually learning the very early days of SEO while working in London on a working holiday visa, as us Antipodeans are wont to do in our 20s. I then returned to my native New Zealand to start up a SEO business in 2002, which turned out to be quite a number of years ahead of when people were actually demanding those services. And then, anyway, eventually ended up in Australia working with Performix. Then I moved to iProspect, and then so I had a long connection with the kind of search world, and then I kind of moved into kind of broader kind of agency data analytics and visualization space. And then most recently with Ground Control Data, we've set up a business which is specializing in tech platforms to understand, optimize, and predict marketing effectiveness. And we're very kind of proud partners for Datametrics in this part of the world.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Phil. And it's great to be working with you guys. And you mentioned some big agency names there, and I know are going to be familiar with so many people who are dialed in or watching this later on YouTube. Apologies for those slides moving around. It's so hot here. The sweat is literally dripping off my fingers onto my mouse and making this very, very shaky. Anyway, so as always at the end, I'm going to be with Phil on Slack. So if you want to get in out of the sun and you've got some longer form questions on the data that you're going to see today, jump in and join us there. Alternatively, don't forget that you can actually post questions into the Q&A box through GoToMeeting as we go through. So without further ado, let's get on looking at the data. And before we do that, let's take a look at some of the trend patterns in data that we're also familiar with. So here we've split this data into 2 parts, into 2 different categories: forecasted trends and reactive trends. And the forecasted trends we're very familiar with. You got the steady growth, companies like Nike, like Apple. You've got decline, search terms like the very first one that we ever put into the Pi platform was DVD player, Blu-ray, things like that. And then you've got that evergreen content with all year round demand like Coca-Cola. And then you've got seasonal data as well, based on things that happen every year. And now we're seeing these really sharp peaks, these rises in search volumes, and followed by these massive declines typified by the pandemic. And what we're going to do today is we're going to overlay those peaks and declines over existing forecasted trends to see the impact that that has. So you're familiar with all of these, obviously, aren't you, Phil?
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice. Okay, so let's begin in Australia. Okay, so what we're looking at are a number of different categories here and the search volume, the average monthly search volume. And what we're interested in here are which trends saw a really sharp peak at the start of the pandemic, i.e. February through to April. Okay, no big surprise, right up front, fitness equipment and classes, probably more fitness equipment. E-learning in Australia saw a huge growth, things to do at home as well. So Phil, my question to you is, are there any surprises in this data? And do you expect these raised volumes to be maintained? And if so, for how long?
No, so look, I think all the obvious things that were going to go up went up. Probably the surprising thing is just the scale of some of those increases. Like that 424% for the fitness equipment and classes is incredibly large. Likewise, the 200% for e-learning. I think the one thing that I was pretty surprised by was telecommunications overall being relatively flat. I mean, 28% is still a big lift in the normal times, but compared to everything else, it is pretty flat. But if you dive into it a bit more, what was interesting is that mobile phones actually, searches for mobile phones actually went down. Maybe that makes sense. People couldn't go to the stores to try them out or buy them, some logistical issues. But certainly a big uplift in kind of network-related kind of search terms as well. And then that kind of evened themselves out to be around that kind of 28% growth overall. And as to whether things are going to kind of stick around forever, I think the interesting thing is a lot of them are really tied to this pandemic and the lockdowns and the situation you find yourselves in. Now, the situation in Australia at the moment is that it varies from state to state. So I'm living in Melbourne, and we're in season 2 of the lockdown. And so it's all a bit grim, and we're stuck at home, and everyone's wearing masks. But if you go over to Western Australia or Queensland or Tasmania, they're all happy and carefree and relatively free of restrictions. So it's not going to last. There's always going to be breaks and changes in different states. So, we're just going to see this switching on and switching off of behavior state by state, for some time yet until we get this under control.
And that's really interesting. And I would love to do a study. Maybe this is something we look at about how search behavior, types of search and intent varies from state to state. If Google really is or personalizing or localizing data to that extent, I think that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that was the rises. So here we're looking to see the trends that show a sharp decline as the pandemic eased. The biggest one there, a drop of 65%. That was fitness equipment and classes. You then got e-learning and then health and household. So food and drink, that's an example of continuous growth, just subtly impacted. And things to do at home, that's generally consistent, but has naturally been affected by the pandemic. So do these numbers, these drops ring true for you in what you've seen and experienced, Phil?
Yeah, look, they do. And I think there's probably a couple of interesting points here. So you've got many kind of retailers who are still continuing to report kind of record sales. So even though you might be seeing for a category searches are going down, people are still shopping. So I think you've had this initial drive to people turning to online and actually buying things for the first time, and then there's some loyalty, and they've found a service or a shop that they really like, and they're going back and buying again. And obviously for some of these things like fitness equipment, you buy your treadmill or your cycle bike, your indoor cycle bike or rowing machine or what have you, and you don't need to buy another one. That's going to be in your house for years to come. So certainly it does make a certain amount of sense, and time's going to tell how many of these are actually going to stick around. And I think certainly some of them, even though there have been declines, they're still well up on where they were before. I mean, we still got double-digit kind of numbers in here versus the triple-digit growth numbers from the previous slide. So there's a lot of increased activity that is definitely going to be here to stay.
Yeah, and you raise a really interesting point there. We have seen declines, but we're now, all of these data points, they're still higher than they were before. And what we'll take a look at in a bit, and we spoke about this the other day, Phil, was, well, has the landscape changed? And if it's changed, to what extent has it changed? Okay, coming on to that. So yeah, a little bit more on fitness equipment here. Yeah, 65% drop. Have we got shredded? Do we just not care anymore? Or as you say, Phil, I think people have probably bought the kit. It's probably now gathering dust at home, and there's only a limit. There's a limit to the amount of fitness equipment you can buy. Fair to say?
Yeah, and look, and with classes, people are searching for, online exercise and online yoga classes, and a lot of them they will have found somebody and they're just going to stick with that particular instructor, for some time to come. But certainly, I think in Melbourne, where we're in, the next lockdown, there's a lot more just giving up and not really caring about it. First time around, everyone's going, hey, here's an opportunity to, take this time for, bettering ourselves, and now it's alcohol and TV. Thanks very much. Not talking from personal experience, just observations.
Of course not, Phil. Of course, and you are drinking water, as we saw. And I was playing around with Google Suggest the other day, and I was using wildcards and putting things like yoga. And there is a huge increase in the number of people who are now no longer, as we know, looking for yoga classes, but looking for online. And in fact, if you put any of those fitness things in there with a wildcard asterisk up front in Suggest, it's all gone online now. So big change in intent reflected in the landscape. Okay, insurance. Okay, up 63%. What trends are here to stay? We talked about this the other day. What's your take on what we're seeing here, Phil, for insurance?
Yeah, so looking at that May to June, so yes, absolutely looks like there's a big change. But if we look at the context over several months, there's been a massive kind of decrease. So travel insurance has just absolutely plummeted. I think what we saw about a 90% drop from February into March for travel insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. And then there has been a surprising, maybe a dead cat bounce into kind of May and June, but there is also the cruise kind of ships that are now taking advanced bookings, and there's many kind of tour companies that are coming up with policies to enable some flexibility if people are booking their holidays for 2021 and beyond. So it makes sense that there's a little bit of increase in travel insurance. Now, health insurance was a bit of a surprising kind of drop, particularly given people kind of focused on, in health in the current situation. But this increase that we're seeing kind of May into June is very typical for Australia, because that is the peak time of the year, particularly from an advertiser point of view, where there's many health insurers are putting, vast majority of their annual budget into just the last kind of few weeks, or even some cases few days of the year, because this is a tax consideration in Australia, and you need to have your private health insurance in order to get the rebates in your income insurance. Sorry, your income tax.
Yeah, and you said as much as 80% of their annual budgets is spent, in that 2 or less week period.
I have worked on these clients in the past, and it's just utterly insane amounts of money. Like when when you're basically getting new IOs written every day because you've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's incredible volumes being crammed into a very short period of time.
Phenomenal. So that turns out to be not so much of a dead cat bounce, maybe an alive cat bounce. Then there's perhaps a small glimmer of hope. As you say,
for sure.
a long way back from here. Okay, so trends that are here to stay, and again, we're still looking at the Australian market: sportswear, loungewear, men's sportswear, men's loungewear, those lines there. And you had some interesting insights on this, Phil. Can you mind going through that again?
Yeah, so if we looked at overall for the category, and you can kind of see in the kind of lines above, there's been the big decreases in kind of loungewear and sportswear. But for the men's subcategory, I think there's been quite an interesting trend, and I think it's conjecture, but I think it's a lot of men who have probably never even thought about doing online shopping for this kind of thing before, and they have tried it and gone, hey, really, this isn't too bad at all. and then they're going back for some more. So while the women have been there, done that, bought the t-shirt literally, men are trying it out for the first time, and this looks like it could be a trend that sticks.
Yeah, and I must run that analysis and see if indeed that is the same in the UK as well. That is pretty interesting. Talking of the UK, okay, we've got a couple of slides from the UK. We're looking at the trends that saw a sharp peak, just as we did with Australia. So again, here we're looking at February and April, right at the start, up until the very peak of the pandemic. 659% fitness equipment and classes again. Home and garden in the UK, sportswear and loungewear. Okay, any standout anomalies here? I mean, you've looked at the UK data, Phil, you've looked at the Australian. Anything jumps out to you that's different?
Yeah, well, clearly the fitness equipment in classes at 659% is massive, and much more than Australia. I also was really interested in the much bigger increase in home and garden, but Brits love the backyard, whereas Australians are probably maybe more heading to the beach when the season's right. But I thought the really interesting thing here is that although there's an uplift in e-learning, it was nothing like we saw in Australia.
Yeah, I don't know
what
why
you think about that yourselves, about what the implications are there for Australia versus the UK.
Yeah, I think after this, I'm going to go and drill down on that data a little bit more. And certainly, you're right about home and garden. I mean, the peak we saw for home and garden searches was actually a hell of a lot bigger than last May, which was, again, unseasonably high down to weather. So it looks like pandemic trumps weather in this case.
Yeah, well, but it's probably, a synergy of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so again, those are the rises. Now we're looking at the declines. So the table on the right, that's May and June. Okay, again, similar to Australia, you've got fitness equipment and classes. They've experienced the sharpest decline. Insurance, again, has begun to see some uplift. And then we've got e-learning. E-learning, big difference between the UK and Australia.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So, right. Now, so we know that there has been a big rise, a big peak, and a drop. The drops, are actually higher than we were previously, but how different is the landscape? Okay, the features. Okay, I'm a little obsessed with the features within the SERP landscape and reading the SERP landscape. So we're going to begin with a chart that you're familiar with, Phil. I'm sure a lot of people out there are familiar with, but for anybody who's not familiar with this SERP matrix, what this is doing is analyzing the SERP results for a number of search terms over a period of time. In this case, we're looking at 3 weeks during February, during May, and during July. What does the landscape look like? And we've tried to iron out seasonal fluctuations here. So this was for beauty and grooming. So nobody could get out and get their hair cut or their beard trimmed or whatever, I don't know, waxing, you name it, I don't know what goes on. But in May, during the peak, there was a significant drop in text ads. Yeah, that was a no-brainer. But we've come out the other side. And again, I've ruled out standard seasonal impact. There's been a fall in video presence. There's been a fall in people also ask. During pandemic, there were a lot more questions. Pre-pandemic, there were even more questions. So Phil, do you think that search in general has grown during the pandemic, or people have been searching differently? What's your impression?
Yeah, well, certainly when we look at the kind of media landscape and media consumption, then there's absolutely been a flight to digital, and the way that people are, just stuck at home and probably, have a bit more freedom to do some searches on Google during work hours because they don't have their co-workers or boss kind of looking over their shoulder, and frankly, there's a lot of novel concepts going on. So how do you live your life and do your shopping and do your exercise and all these other kind of things in this current environment? So certainly a lot of changes in behavior and people, probably discovering digital and online services for the first time.
Yep.
But after you've had that big rush to it, then it's kind of settling down a little bit. So some interesting changes in what Google is seeing as the types of results that people are going to respond to, hence the changes that we're seeing in these types of features.
Absolutely, because the SERP is a reflection of intent, and it's so important that any business really analyzes the landscape to understand the features that are important. And I've got a theory in a minute on the change in videos in the next slide, but this is things to do at home, arts and craft. Okay, so during the lockdown, people also asked was much higher. People had more questions. Okay, those weren't reflected in the answer card. So to me, that means people weren't responding and reacting quickly enough, because I always say to my clients, okay, use the people also ask, get inside the mind of the searcher, of the customer, and create content that answers those questions. Okay, then we come into July. Video content again was less. And a question for you, Phil, is in your experience, how much attention are people paying to SERP features and the visibility for SERP features?
Yeah, nowhere near enough, I think, is a pretty standard answer there. So
Yeah.
look, this has been one of the really interesting things, kind of working with Pi and going out and talking to a whole range of different clients kind of about the software. And this is quite a novel concept to them. And these are people that are, deep in search marketing for quite some time. And there is a real emphasis on paid search and your classic listings, and not really too many people actually paying attention to what else is going on. And I think, there's a lot of missed opportunity and kind of money being left on the table by, not diversifying that content strategy. Now, there's certainly players out there that, that are interested, but sometimes they're finding organizational roadblocks in being able to actually do the right things, because there's such a kind of embedded mentality around the two different types of text results.
100%. And as you say, Phil, if you're not looking at this data, if you're not realizing the opportunity, you are leaving money on the table, left, right, and center. Perhaps if people don't have the data, they just turn away. Now,
yeah,
fitness.
But I think the thing that's a bit frustrating is you go and you talk to a client, and they have video content already, and they've got YouTube, and it's just being underutilized, and they've got frequently asked questions with a whole bunch of content, and it would just be a really minor bit of effort to tweak it to be optimized for people, also us, but they're just not doing it, and it's low-hanging fruit. You don't need to create the content, you have it already.
You're so right. Often it's so easy, just a little bit of effort, open a new doorway and generate revenue.
Yeah.
So here's fitness equipment, and the big difference post-pandemic. Okay, people are still working from home. July, okay, a massive increase in videos appearing in the search results, and images as well. But videos, it's probably 3 times the amount of videos returning for the same queries. What does that mean? That means Google understands that people want to see videos. So what's the difference between now and between January and February? Well, people were at work all day, and you can't just play videos in the office. But now you're at home. So if I want to work out how to do a particular exercise, I'd rather watch a video. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting that it is quite different according to this category. So there aren't any particular rules of thumb here to say you must do video, you must do these. It really comes down to what are the topics and the different themes that you are trying to target, and what's going to be generating kind of business for you, and then how do you kind of keep track of what these different features are and optimize accordingly.
Absolutely. So, and that's why you do need to look at that category or topic or intense level. So important. Okay. Moving on from here. Now, I always refer to the SERP as a reflection of intent. And if you want to find out, what people are looking for, what questions they're asking, what they're thinking, because people think and are influenced by the content that they are consuming, then you look at the SERP landscape. So I've done some tests over the past few weeks to look to see how, for individual search terms, the landscape has changed. Now, this first one is video conference. This is Australian data. Go back before the pandemic. What were the top questions people also ask? What do you mean by video conference? And what is the purpose of video conferencing? Fast forward to today. What's the best video conferencing app? And what's the best way to video conference? Okay, I thought this was fascinating. I love that. I'm going to tweet that. But do you think this is likely to apply to other products and services, Phil, where behavior has quickly had to adapt to this situation?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And you know, I've looked at some other things, and we've mentioned kind of yoga and exercise before. You know, and the types of searches and the types of people also ask questions coming up now is all about, you know, what is the best kind of online yoga course, or you know, is doing yoga online kind of safe? And you know, just very different to what we would have seen some months back. So you know, it's almost certain that every category is going to be affected by these changes in behavior and that level of sophistication and how people are trying new things, learning new things, and the types of questions are moving on. So no longer is what is video conferencing, but what is the best app? I already know video conferencing is great. So this is going to be repeated across so many different categories.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what I love about this data is because, you know, this data is so much more truthful than other data that you might try and collect from social media, for example, because as I've said in previous webinars, you know, when people sit down in front of that little search box, they actually ask the truth. Nobody in a meeting puts their hands up and say, excuse me, well, what do you mean by video conference? But yet they'll go home and they'll Google it. And Google responds really quickly to this as well. So it's a direct way of getting at the truth. And anybody that's not taking advantage of people also ask data is really missing out on the opportunity. Or as you said, Phil, leaving money on the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, mini fridges. Okay, I've got a mini fridge. I'm sure you've got a mini fridge, Phil. Before the pandemic. Okay, questions. What's the best mini fridge to buy? How much is a small mini fridge? Okay, basic questions. And post, and I collected this data this week. The biggest questions, is it dangerous to have a mini fridge in your room? And are mini fridges loud? Okay, so, and again, we can see that the value of this, people also ask data. So in your experience, are people interested in people also ask, or are they just, I don't know, skimming past it?
No, I haven't come across too many people that are interested. Although actually, I did have a chat to a guy the other day who built an audience intent modeling kind of idea on the back of this data, and he was delighted to meet someone else who was as interested in as I was. So certainly it does, you know, with the companies and the people that we're talking to, it certainly seems like this is uncharted territory. And I think, you know, when you talk to people about why it's valuable, because it gets to that intent and what are those underlying questions and things that people are worried about. And you can use that for understanding consumer behavior. So it's not just about, in this case, you know, optimizing your visibility and making sure your pages work well, but this can actually help you, you know, understand the messaging and the content and your whole strategy around, you know, targeting people's kind of concerns. So it's to me, it's much bigger and broader data than just about search engine rankings.
It's bigger than search. You're
Yeah.
so right, Phil. All this data is bigger than search, and this data needs to break out of its swim lane, and that's the message we've been preaching for some time. So we're fast running short of time. Probably go a couple of minutes over, but just time to take a quick look at the winners. So when we look at all of those categories that you can see in the chart, the biggest winners overall in Australia, I select, we've got compare the market, these are aggregators, and the point that you raised yesterday so rightly, that's because this share of voice data includes search volume, cost per click, level of competition. So there are so many more factors that are taken into account. So I select, yeah, that is an aggregator in Australia.
Yeah, much like Money Supermarket.
Okay, yeah.
And compare the market, they're, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then we start to see some more interesting data further down with Harvey Norman, I can't even pronounce that. Next one, JBHI.
JB Hi-Fi, which is very similar to Harvey Norman, so they're both kind of electrical goods retailers.
Yeah, because that was the other, that was the real big growth from a search volume perspective. Okay,
Yeah.
so things to do at home, the biggest one, who's owning that? Taste.com.au. What are people doing at home during lockdown, Phil?
They are baking and cooking and getting fat.
So let's expect another peak in exercise equipment the other side of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
UK, who's owning the entire pandemic landscape right now? Well, it's the same situation. Money Supermarket compared to market. Again, this is share of voice data. So it's not based on pure visibility, it's based on value as well. And in terms for the highest volume trend, home and garden. Argos in the top spot. And then we saw something interesting, and I went away and looked at this. Okay, lazyspa.co.uk down there in position 12, a new entrant. I'd never heard of them, so I Googled them. Phil, you know what I found? I found a website that says I'm too busy. Okay, and we talked about what not to do during a pandemic. What you don't do is shut your door and don't let anyone in. That's Google Trends in the UK right now for hot tubs. That's what these guys sell. Okay, so probably not what I would be doing. We're pretty busy. They're shutting down. There are other ways, and there was a previous video, and perhaps we'll link to that, where you can go and take a look and see what you need to do in a situation like that when there is too much traffic and you're out of stock. Okay, so finally,
Talk about leaving money on the table.
Yeah, it is. This whole thing, Phil, is about money on the table. And for anybody out there who's watching this and who isn't looking at those SERP features, take a look, start to track them and just get that money that's sitting on a table. So overall, you need to look at the patterns in the landscape. Okay, shape your content and a format, image, video, social, etc. And be prepared now to roll out content in different formats. And look at the data, look at the landscape, okay, and monitor those shifts in intent. And in so doing, you can build eventuality models to prepare for not if, but when, because you're in one, a second lockdown. And get this data to different teams. And you talked yesterday, Phil, about the importance of getting different people talking, yeah?
Yeah, and I think often one of the big challenges is that there is these organizational roadblocks where, the search team might be separate to the brand team, who are separate to the kind of social team, and they all have different assets which could be contributing to the overall picture, but they're kind of just sitting in these separate silos, and the different teams aren't talking to one another. And that to me is one of the most kind of frustrating things, when the assets are there, but they're not being taken advantage of.
Yeah, never been more of a time for a joined up approach with communication. Okay, yeah. So I think we're out of time there, Phil. I just want to say thank you so much for joining us at this ungodly hour. You've got some incredible insights, and it's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And Friday night in the middle of lockdown is like a Tuesday night. It's no different, so no problem at all. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. And to everyone out there who's dialed in, thanks for dialing in. And if you're dialing in the UK, I see we've got people from Asia as well. If you fancy coming and chatting for 10-15 minutes, I'm sure Phil's going to crack open a beer, and we're going to be in Slack for 10-15 minutes. In the UK, you're probably sunburnt anyway, so you might as well come and join us on Slack. So see you all in a couple of weeks. Thanks again. Thanks, Phil.
Go. Thank you. Bye.